Right, this is going to be episode 52 of OverSight. On this particular one, we've actually got limited time on this episode, so I can't afford the usual 20 minutes of bullshit like one of my tests of that always was money. I told you the whole theory where, like, you got to make the guest feel like, then they like want to join the conversation and they're part of the show. You've already broken the ice down, etc. But in doing so, like, they would only get to talk for about 40 minutes on this episode. So we'll just go ahead and skip that, introduce who the guests are, and almost behave like a normal podcast of some type. But what we'll do differently to normal podcasts in the Overwatch space is we'll actually be entertaining. We'll try not to be too nerdcore, and we won't make too many purely self-referential jokes that only 4 people in the Discord and usually 1 person in that chat doesn't understand. Not calling anyone out in particular, just every single one of you in the fucking motherfucking community. So anyway, why don't you try harder with your podcast? Anyway, see what I mean there? Right, so I can't crouch down to your level. You have to understand. Anyway, you see what I'm doing there? Right, so the guests on this one is in the bottom right-hand corner. We've got Casores. I hope I'm saying that correct. From the Netherlands. Casores. There we go. And he is a coach working with the Atlanta Reign. We'll get into that in a second. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, we've got Avast, because it's about time someone else made some money off his opinions on another stream,
That's
he's making his cut off everyone else, isn't he? It's just the media in Overwatch.
Got to be the conglomerate. You have to be the conglomerate, that's how it works.
You're like Jimmy Fallon. You just bring
volunteer their time instead of on themselves just to get.
What I like is he really is like Jimmy Fallon, because what he does is he brings them on his show, and then the problem with Jimmy Fallon's style is his trick to get you to talk is he's just mad sycophantic, and he's just like, yeah, brilliant, oh god, yeah, oh crazy, oh what's happening then, like, oh my god, yeah, I agree with everything you're saying, keep saying more, keep saying more,
expose the secrets,
yeah,
Thorin.
oh what's going on. So anyway, listen, while that's just the two of us here, what's going on in Outlaws in the back room?
So what my favorite thing about Jimmy Fallon and like that sycophantic style that he has was he had that Fortnite kid, Booga or whatever, who won the $3 million. And it was the saddest attempt that I've seen him do to pretend like he's like an everyman, because he talks to him and he says, 100, you won $3 million. He's like talking about buying stuff, and he's like, $100 is a lot to me. That's what Jimmy Fallon said. I'm like, motherfucker,
no way,
Jesus.
No. He's one of those guys.
All you do is hang around with celebrities and make millions and millions and millions of dollars a year. You're going to go out there and pretend $100 is a lot of money. You probably wipe your ass with $100.
We have a principle. I don't know if you guys in America have this, but the way we say it in England, because obviously there's like still an upper class who used to be the aristocracy and stuff. The concept you have in England to know if someone's out of touch is if you ask them how much is. We use pints, obviously. I don't know what yours would be, a quart. We say like how much is a quart of milk, basically. And the idea is like anyone who is not like on the day-to-day level, they literally won't know, Monty. Like they can be off too low or too high by a factor of 10. Like they might just be like, is it $50? You're like, no, you've never been to the shop, have you, for a while?
It's just the Arrested Development joke, right?
Yeah.
Like, what could a banana cost, Michael? $10? Like,
right, there we go.
There we go.
That's the classic. That's the classic Arrested.
That's the American version, right? Okay, so here's obviously we need to know about the Atlanta Reign to start this show. So first of all, one thing, and this isn't as simple as in other games, because I notice in Overwatch, you have these larger coaching staffs. Like sometimes someone's listed as a coach, but they're an analyst, because that is on some level a type of coach. So what is your role within the Atlanta Reign, mate?
So I specifically focus on the micro, which means basically focusing more on the players than the overall strategy and capturing the individual player into the strategy. We let Sephi and Silence, our assistant coach, do most of like, we're going to run this, and this on this map. Okay. I go more like, you play this like this on that map. So it's very specific and individualistic, because we think that too many captains on the wheel in terms of strategy is a bit too much. So we decided to, split the roles a little bit like that. And then we have an analyst, Danny. He lives in Canada, who does all the stats for us. He doesn't do a lot of the coaching. He just helps out with, we need our win rate for this map for the last 20 days, in scrims. And then he provides us that stat, so we know like what we need to change on what map.
Is it tricky to get players to take on board what you're telling them? I mean, if you literally tell them like the way to do something, isn't that the sort of thing some players have pushback against?
I think it very much depends on the player. I also wouldn't say like I tell a player like you have to do this. I like show them examples where they do it right and where they do it wrong,
Yes.
and then like they can figure out themselves how to do something like that. I don't say, oh, you have to do this here, in this moment. No, I say you should try this sometime, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
It's like there's a story I'll tell you, Monty, because obviously one of the things I always find interesting about coaching is like even in traditional sports, some of those sports have only had the type of coaching we think of now, maybe for like 30, 40 years, so the field's always changing. There's always new techniques. And I remember reading a book about Phil Jackson, the coach of the Bulls and the Lakers in the 90s and the 2000s. And one of his techniques is so bizarre, but it's a clever one where instead of literally just taking a play and pausing it and telling someone like, look, you fucked that up. Like, what did you do wrong? Do it differently. What he would do is he would edit these game highlights and lowlights, and when someone did a really bad play, like they did like a terrible bounce pass that went out of bounds, and they should have taken the easier angle, he would just intercut it with a scene from a movie where someone just like accidentally shot their own like another soldier on their like friendly fire or something, or someone just like slashing the throat. And so all he was doing was like subliminally programming their brains to be like, you are killing us, you are literally killing us. Like, but as like a subtle way to, well, it wasn't that subtle in some sense, but what I mean, it's a way to influence them.
So here's what we do. Yeah. So next time now that we have the replay viewer, you can actually film and pull up these clips yourself, Casores. Right. So what you can do is that every time that that one of your players messes up in a microwave, you take a shot of their body getting teabagged by the other team, and then just insert it straight in there to discourage them from doing it.
Oh yeah.
And anytime they make a Papega brain play, you just show that clip of like Gods, like when he's like straightening out his eyebrows with those shades on, and then that's just going to immediately associate with them everything they don't want to be. And then you contrast it with that. You just keep contrasting.
Really opens
this is what not to become children. Yeah, exactly. It's the Papega thyroid gland that needs to be activated to whatever. Anyway, so tell us a little bit about your team then, because obviously this is a new squad for this season, and we've just come out of obviously a drastically different meta. So where is the Atlanta Reign in the current meta of the role lock?
So I think role lock is very good for us. Many make the meme that Erster's out of break jail. He was a very good break, but he's an even better DPS. What I think we are really good at is thinking like on the fly and making quick decisions in game with our team.
Now, how do you do that when you have this mixed language roster?
So the way the team communicates in matches, because the scrim is different. In scrims, a lot of the time we have our players say things in Korean between maps, what they'd like to do different, and then our translator will translate it. But at this point, Pokpo's English is so good that when Dako or Erster want to say something in Korean and they don't know how to say it in English, they'll say it really fast in Korean and Pokpo will translate it.
Okay.
I see. Okay. So also a question is that I see that you've shifted away a lot more from using, because FRD used to be, I now call him Fred on stream just because why not? But because it used to be Fried, but now it's obviously FRD. So, but it seems like he's been getting a lot more playtime, and it's also seemed a little bit more consistent. Is it this something that fits with the roster currently because you're moving, because of English, or is it just that you feel more comfortable with FRD right now in terms of his flexibility?
I think Fried's communication style is really good for the team because he's always really calm, which is something that our team needs. Both Fried and Masa are always really calm communication-wise, and the way he puts up strategies is really good for both the Korean and the English players, and he synergizes with Pokpo pretty well, especially as Hagarissa. So we just feel like Pride's been working out pretty well for us. He keeps the team morale really high in the game too.
Okay.
And do you have a split because also you talked about how you're the micro coach? Are you So I know some teams, because also there's a big discussion I read about are coaches not good in the Overwatch League?
In what context? What was the context of it?
The context was just the context was of course after New York got rolled by after New York got rolled by who was it that rolled them again? It was
Chengdu.
Chengdu Hunters, yeah.
Yeah, there was their fourth row. They were it was essentially DAE Pavane bad, it was, but pretty much it was
By the way, that was the first time in 2 seasons they have ever been beaten 4-0.
Yes. Yeah. It was a first for them. And
it's also because, to be fair, like that was right after obviously the Washington team also.
It was an interesting day. It was an
so obviously every fan was like, "Well, these players can't be bad." So wait a minute, process of elimination. It was those goddamn coaches after all. Like they don't get any credit for when they were winning. Apparently,
Wizard was the true genius. Justice wins. It was always Wizard. It's just, of course, it's just natural progression there. But I guess it's more of some teams have a role focus for coaches where they have support, tank, and DPS coaches. Depending on what their staff level is. And then you said you have more of you have Brad and Silent sort of like, this is our macro strategy. And then you have you doing micro. Is there like a split focus on roles for you guys? Or do you just sort of talk to all the roles yourself in terms of the micro?
There's no split focus on roles. Simply because we just don't feel like it's necessary. Like, first of all, we don't have as many coaches as other teams. We only have 3 coaches and an analyst. So getting one coach for every role is a bit scuffed. Sometimes we do where, because main tank, for example, is a more macro-focused role, like shield placement, etc. Silence will talk with Popo more than I do sometimes, when it's not as mechanically intensive. But I think in general, I talk with players from all the roles about the micro style. We don't have like a specific like, oh, this coach will go talk to the tanks or this coach will talk to supports. No, we just feel like whatever comes up to the coach, whatever he sees. So for example, during scrims, I'll make notes. If I see one mistake happen a lot, I'll bring that up to the player at the end of the day. You were doing this wrong a lot today. Here's some examples. Let's work on it tomorrow. I think most coaches do that, like especially me in Silence. And he does it more the strategy style, like you weren't following the strategy here. And I do it more in the individual gameplay style.
Do you think it's necessary? Do you think a coaching split is necessary? Where like some people say, well, you need to have a lot of staff to cover all of these different roles and the variables? Or do you think that it's not at all required and that your system is one that's ideal, or at least like closer to ideal like coaching system within Overwatch?
I think more coaches is better if you have a very, very, very structured coaching system, right? If you have like the head coach that says, oh, you have to do this and it has to be in this term of strategy and then you have to do this. But I think with the system in the Atlanta Reign, having even more coaches wouldn't be better, because we don't go about things with Brad, for example, saying, oh, Casores, you have to do this, this, and this today, For me, it's more about bringing up my own initiative and seeing my own things and helping the players the way I see it, and incorporating them into the strategy, not like this general like role division in coaches. So I don't think.
Keep going.
I don't think it'd be good for the Atlanta Reign specifically, but I think if you have a very leadership heavy and less like strategy heavy head coach, it could be good for it.
Because obviously one of the big problems when you're talking about the coaching angle is, even if people know, like for example, a lot of people know whoever the big name head coach of most of the teams is, but sometimes, as you see on the Liquipedia, there might actually be teams that have 3 or 4 people listed. You never quite know how many of those are active. What do they do within the squad? Are they an old coach who just hasn't been taken off the list sometimes? Obviously, it's only people with insider knowledge are going to know this, but that includes some of the people in this chat. So here's the question. What, just from things you've heard or observations in the league, who would you guess are the best coaching staffs in the Overwatch League? This is for everyone. Who would we make if we were making a short list, just based on information you have or interviews you've seen or even team performance and whatever the process of elimination, making a guess? It's obviously going to be very speculative, but I thought it'd be interesting to ask. Who would you say, Avast? Who comes to mind immediately for you?
I think I have like a relatively... personally, despite New York's performances, I do think Pavane is a very solid coach. I think that Pavane is definitely up there, regardless of anything else. I'm just gonna say Pavane, I think, is very good. I've worked with Krusty, obviously. Didn't play, but I worked with Krusty.
There we go. Some would say that was a feature, not a bug of the system.
It could be just part of the plan.
Yeah, he just knew you were better in media. He knew this was the path for you. It's about knowing what everyone's role is.
Writing me along there to
exactly.
But I think
so. How was Krusty?
I think Krusty, the one thing he's great at, and sort of what lead into Casores' point, Casores point?
Yeah, that's good.
That's good enough. That's good enough. It's close.
Good enough.
Yeah. So I think is that he is someone, when you talk about having a very regimented style, it's like he is probably like insanely regimented in terms of like how you structure a team. In terms of hierarchy, he is king. He is God Emperor Krusty, and you will do as he says. And if you do not, then bad things will happen.
Not just for you. Like I've seen a lot of the coaches coaching actively from visiting many team houses, and Krusty definitely works very effectively with players that will bend to his will. But he is the guy he's not going to wait until the end of the match. If something's going wrong in a scrim, he's going to stand behind that player and just start shouting at them, like in the middle of a scrim, and in between rounds, like asking them why they're doing things. He's very active. He's constantly like prowling around the back. He's no bullshit, no nonsense. Like, so you have to find the right players that respond well to very aggressive coaching, but I think he is very good if you can get him.
And he's good at hitting I think a lot of things that esports coaching in particular, especially Overwatch so far, have not hit their stride yet, is sort of the emotional element of coaching, where it's like you sort of have to have the right, how do you read the room, or how do you motivate a player? Exactly. And someone told me an anecdote and I've seen how emotional Krusty can get, but I was told an anecdote recently for the Shock where someone was just having just an absolute shit scrim block. It was just terrible. Like, it was just like, just one of those scrim blocks where you're just getting rolled, like, and your team's not performing and like motivation's low. And there's one player that was just not having a good time, and Krusty just like takes a headset, just boom, and just like chunks it and just like destroys against the wall. It's like, this is unacceptable. Like, obviously, like, maybe not always destroying equipment is the best idea, but like, it worked because apparently then the emotion picked up a lot more, and their scrim block sort of turned around from that, because everyone was like, oh shit, like we need to play Overwatch. We're getting paid to play this game. Probably like, let's get back into it. Let's get our heads back into the game.
Turned out actually that headset was a gift from that player's grandmother, and that actually was the problem holding him back. Like, he was missing home, he was a little bit coddled, and when finally the headset broke, that actually shattered his paradigm as well. He became a man in that moment. So Krusty is just like, it's some next level shit. He's on some road to Damascus level shit money.
I think he's a good example of terms of especially in terms of the emotional element of coaching. He's very good. I still think Pavane's very good despite the struggles New York has. Paijan's is also a great head coach. There's a couple that I actually had a very high opinion of Moon until he made some critical mistakes, because coaches aren't infallible. Like, they can make bad mistakes. And
I think, mate, if you look at the rosters he's had, I think he got quite a lot out of some of them. They look like some of them were in peak form.
I think he was definitely high up there for me, and despite some questionable decisions at times, it's still, just because you make mistakes doesn't necessarily make you bad at your job.
I mean, that's what I said when he left too, is that the thing about Moon is the way that he coaches is he's a system coach, and he's like a meta coach, in that he is going to take his team in the direction of perfect play, no matter what players he has. So that's what he was demanding of his players, when that may not have been the right goal, I think, for the Los Angeles Valiant. And also, I don't think he was very good at resolving conflicts between players. I think we can say that as well. That was not a strong suit of his. And in fact, some of the things he did, I think, incited conflicts among players, which, I mean, I don't want to go into it too much, because obviously,
but that is the gist.
The place for
of him. Yeah, but I think highly of those coaches. I think it's tough to really go beyond that, because you start getting into more minutia details, and you have to be within the organization to really see the impact. It's like, I would honestly nominate, if you terms of like pure, like, oh, this is a coach you can look to and say, like, this is probably very good game knowledge because of like their experience before, with Shake for Boston.
I think Boston's coaches are quite good.
I don't really have, I've heard very mixed reviews on Gunba, so I don't really know. I can't really put an accurate opinion myself. I haven't also interacted with him too much. I've only just memed him on Twitter for some unfortunate losses. So it's just like, but I think Shake, in terms of a pure game knowledge aspect, is a very solid coach. But having worked with him, it's more of like, where does it still getting into stride of like, how do I motivate players? How do I connect with players? And how do I push them to always like be working at their full potential, and like connect, and also synergizing as a team?
And people will laugh when we talk about Boston's coaches right now, just because they'll be like, oh, Boston, so terrible. But at the same time, they've done more with less money. And also, you can really see how much the coaching, like they're hugely, they as an organization are hugely emphasizing coaching and in-game calling, and those are the kind of players that they want. And the coaches come up with and design a lot of their set plays. And Boston was winning a lot earlier this season because they had so many set plays, or because their in-game leaders were creative in their shot calling. So they were winning games that they really should not have won. And in fact, they had a winning record earlier this season when they had something like a 48% team fight win rate, which is crazy. So they were winning the right fights. They were running the set plays. And I think that's been a strength of Boston. And also, how can you blame them when they like sell all of their great players, right? Like, you know, they keep
well, is that their goal or just the result? Is that the goal? The result is more of the question there. But
sure,
I think
sure, but at the same time, like if you're going to employ that strategy of bringing in new players and then selling them when they get good, you better have a decent coaching system in place to continue that cycle.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the thing that's interesting is, obviously, if you went back to season 1, true, a lot of the evaluations back then were based around narratives. So the fact that NYXL was the best team, and then also, as I've mentioned in the past, Wizard Young did a great job of branding himself as the mastermind coach. You know, he did a very, like, he certainly set the seeds in motion there for that reputation to bloom. But when he's come over to the Washington Justice, obviously the terrible, terrible record they had for so long meant that people either just stopped talking about him, or they would, if they were like an apologist, they'd use the angle of like, well, there's no more, he doesn't have any good players. Or some people even spun that as like, he took up all the money. There was no money left for players, even though I'm not sure that's actually how budgets work.
All right. And also, let's dispel this right now about the Washington Justice. The Washington Justice is spending a lot of money.
They have a lot of money. I'm glad we're hitting on that point. They have a lot of money.
This is a team that we already know volunteered for like 5 homestands next year. So the problem with the Justice, and we are going to talk about how much better they've gotten and how they're a very good team right now. So it's all is not lost, right? At least in the 2-2-2 meta for them. But you have to remember that people are like, oh man, they look at these players. They must not spend a lot of money. They spend a lot of money.
Yes.
They spend a lot of money to make a shit team. So
and they've also spent a lot of money correcting their mistakes, too. They spent a lot of money even correcting the mistakes after they've already spent a lot of money.
Buying out players.
It's kind of insane.
They are not Boston, to be clear to everyone. They are a team that has spent many, many, many dollars to make this team, many more than other teams that have done better than them.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a myth that can be dispelled. Now, you could make the argument that, okay, well, they spent so much money that maybe they sort of ran out of money for a little bit because of how much money they spent. And they'd be like, yes, but that's not because they lacked money. It's rather they spent so much money that they simply have no more at that time. So it's a very different scenario for them.
I mean, to be fair, when you look at their team now, like the changes they have made some good changes over the time.
Yes. I mean,
like it started off looking really bad, but obviously, first of all, the record's good, and then secondly, now, even just in terms of the roster, it's not as bad as you remember, because obviously they already had a couple of good players anyway. It's just they couldn't really be unlocked.
Yeah, yes. I think it's the argument of other people. I think there's someone brought up is like, well, I guess it was actually Avala, I think, the coach, said like, well, we just didn't expect GOATs to last this long when we built the team. On Twitter. They said this publicly. So this is not juice. I'm not over here telling you something that's not public knowledge. It happened.
I do know that in the Justice trials and in the Raid trials, we enforced like different comps, like Sombra Tracer, like Doofus Sombra, like a lot of these DPS comps. Never in the trials did we run GOATs once,
for you
which
guys
is a flaw on a lot of these teams.
Yeah, and it's a huge flaw because here's the thing. You could not have known at the time that you were trialing players. And by the way, we're talking about like October, September, November last year. So we're talking about things that happened like almost a year ago right now. So obviously nobody expected GOATs to last this long. But the problem with that kind of trial is that you could not have known that a role lock was coming in at the time. Ergo, the proper way to trial players was in a variety of different flex roles and combinations, because just because GOATs was here now doesn't mean that the game wouldn't be shifting to like a different style of play with like 2 tanks, 3 DPS, 1 support or something like that. So there were a lot, and indeed we did see that towards the end of the GOATs meta. We did see a lot of the triple DPS. That's what the Shanghai Dragons were doing. So in a way, the way you ended up in the right place because that's where the developers happened to go with the game in terms of 2-2-2 role lock. So I guess you end up being sort of prescient in that context. But had the game gone another way, then you guys would have been kind of screwed. Or if it hadn't been locked at all, then we could have just seen more goats and more triple DPS. So I think like that was a really dangerous conceptual way to do trials at the time that has worked out for you. Luckily.
Definitely. Yeah.
I mean, it's also like a good team building, right? Like you have to meta-proof, I feel. Yes. Like it's one thing to do. I think that honestly, like people can criticize like, well, that was dumb for them to only run role lock. But it's like, yeah, you should run role locks because you want to meta-proof your team. But also you should probably host some within the current meta to know how the team is going to fit. So I can't blame you guys. I can't blame Atlanta or even Justice for doing that. But I do blame Justice for completely ignoring the current meta.
Yes, sure. So. You could even make an argument. I've noticed there's an interesting aspect to how metas evolve, where obviously it isn't just purely like changing a character or changing a gun or nerfing balance literally. It's also how people think of the game, what their paradigm is for how they think the game is played. And so I'll give you a quick example. In CSGO, we had a nerf maybe like 2 months ago, where what happened was the gun that they nerfed was a gun that was used on the defensive side. And because it made it a lot easier to just hold one position and get like multiple kills when someone came around the corner instead of having to reposition after each kill, it meant that actually the bizarre thing is when they then nerfed it, you sort of trained the offensive side to be better at doing certain things now against the original gun they were playing against the whole career before. So actually now in theory, even though it's the same exact matchup as it would have been a year ago, it now will be played out differently, and conceptually teams will think of that differently. So I think you could even say from the way the GOATS aspect went, first of all, the GM's got a massive wake-up call that it's going to be very, very tricky between seasons how you recruit players. You've got to probably have some forethought as to like some wiggle room. You can't just have a team that ideally is this current meta. But at the same time, you've got to add in as well. I would guess it probably really stress tested these coaching staffs, because if you were a team that didn't have a very viable GOAT squad in terms of personnel, like obviously teams like Outlaws had these problems, it really put the strain on your coaching staff. Like what could they bring out of players? How could you transition a player into a role without ruining him? Because there's another factor, you know, when people come back to a different role, if you've changed the way they play the game, they don't always go back to what they used to do directly. You know, you'd love to say you wind the clock back, but you don't really always do that. So in light of that, what have they done the other way around? Like how's the Washington Justice gotten this good?
I think first off, a lot of it is Corey's individual performance. Like his stats as Widowmaker are crazy, and his stats as Hanzo are crazy right now. And I think that he's coming close to like the hardest carry player that we have in this league at the moment, simply because his positioning and his mechanics are so good. So I think like he is just absolutely popping off right now, and it's incredibly impressive to watch. But people won't think about this, but like statistically, he's the best Widowmaker in the league. At least before this, the last couple of days, I haven't seen the latest.
Also, I mean, stats. Has the high, and also Hanzo almost the potentially best Hanzo as well.
Yeah. You know? So just in terms of like one man carrying, I'm not sure over a multi-game stretch we've seen this much of a hard carry from the damage role potentially ever. I'm trying to think like at the top level of Overwatch competition.
I think you could argue that at one point during stage 2, like early of last year, stage 3ish, like the Tracer carries and also Sabiobi for New York were and Carpe for Fusion even I think at points was it was equal to that role. As also Casores, for someone that's like a coach that's looking the outside in now and you see Justice rising, do you see a structural change in Justice for this stage, or do you just see like, well, the meta they actually built for is here, and so now they can play Overwatch? That
sounds like your own message there. They've told you like what the hashtag's supposed to be there, Avast. Like now that you've got a hashtag Justice Rising, what do you see going forwards in this?
Hey, you know, just another team to get me in New Jersey.
Yes, there you go, the branding.
So there we go. So, but do you see anything there, Casores?
I think definitely Corey being off Sorry is a big change for them because he's just so good on the DPS.
He was also trash on Zarya. To be clear, like he was one of the worst Zaryas in the league.
Yeah. I mean, okay.
I mean, in terms of utility, at least, like maybe okay damage, but in terms of the actual utility,
From the coaching side, though, that is actually one thing that I work really hard on with players, both with Baby Bay and the friend, like Zarya bubbles and how to use them. Because all these players, all these DPS players, they have the tracking right. They just need to learn how to position as Zarya, how to like be that frontline tank while also like dealing out the damage, learn the grabs, learn the bubbles. So that's one thing that's very coach intensive. And Corey not doing as good on Zarya, I think, is also a flaw in like the coaching style, maybe. Of course, I can't say that, but
sure,
for certain, but it could be.
So you think right now their success is almost exclusively to the meta shift, and that their coaching staff really isn't to credit in terms of?
Did they lock into this meta in that sense?
Maybe a little bit, but they also create a lot of space for Corey because Sam is also like pretty good at Hog compared to his Diva. I think
his Diva is a lot better.
Yeah, Nathaniel Sam's Hog is much better. I agree.
Yeah.
Janice, see, in a sense, Monty's agreeing he's much better at those jumps. Yeah.
Janice can't do as much things bad on Orisa as he can on.
I can see the contrast mechanism you're all using here, right? Okay, yeah, keep going.
So I think they're definitely put in a position where they can let Corey hard carry and play around him. But also a lot of the changes they made over the season has helped them. I think Arc is a big upgrade. He's doing like pretty good in the Baptiste now too. His keys were great.
Okay.
So also something that helped Arc was more of a transition away from a Lucio meta because Arc like, so to describe Arc's playstyle, I don't know why the NYXL Lucios have been trained to do this for whatever reason, but they are really not very impactful. Neither him nor Animo in GOATS was great. And they spend so much of their time at the back of the formation instead of trying to like skate around and make plays and set up plays. There were times on Washington Justice where Arc, his team would get absolutely pounded whenever they would gonna like try and attack on assault, right? So they go through and they try and take, they be on their attack round, and he would die 0 times, but his team would take like 1.5 points because he just doesn't set up anything. He just sits there. And I think having him in a Mercy meta or in a Baptiste meta where he likes to play very far back, it doesn't work on Lucio in the GOATS meta. In fact, oftentimes teams that set up their Lucios to die were the ones who were most successful in GOATS because that would cause a play to be made. Like they would go in and sacrifice themselves. But as soon as you've speed boosted in and you've used your right click to reposition people, you can die. You're not going to do anything else really, right?
Your purpose is fulfilled.
Yes, you're
I mean, but also you don't want to be the Cruz Lucio where Paris got was super one-dimensional with that.
Sure. But I mean, there are players like IDK that are like mega aggressive that have made a lot of plays for the Hangzhou Spark. So Masa's another good example of or Big Goose, like players that do play pretty far up there and try and like open up engagements. So these are. The thing about his Lucio was that I think he was just very ill-suited in terms of his style to the meta. So I think bringing back Mercy and Baptiste is going to help him a lot more. Even if you play Lucio now, there's less of a demand for you to be the playmaker because you're often speed boosting an Orisa or Hog into position and then standing there next to them, right? So that they can set up the halt hook play and you just stand there. So I just think it's very different in terms of the style that he in particular was expected to play with the team, and this just gels much better with what he's good at.
By the way, along those lines, that's obviously one thing that is an absolute contrast to when we last had the ability to play dive metas, is there was no Baptiste in the game back then. So what has the impact of that been on the meta?
Huge.
Yeah, significant, I would say. I think it's pretty significant. The fact that you have a second defensive ult, but it's on cooldown now, is pretty big. So it makes Genji's life even harder than before. Now that you have a lamp that takes like 3 swings to die, so and keeps everyone healthy. I think that's a pretty huge impact, realistically. I think it's also good for players like Arc, who is Arc's impact. I think Arc's impact has always been much more felt on his game sense and like his cohesion within a team rather than his mechanics, and that's why he excels on heroes like Mercy and Baptiste a lot more than Lucio. Yeah. But also, I think it's sort of when you talk about the main supports for New York, even though Animo, who I think is a lot better mechanically than Arc, is that I think it's just sort of the Jonak effect, where regardless of the meta, they sort of been beaten in submission of like, we must protect Jonak. And so like, we must like peel for Jonak only. Like you saw it in season 1, when Lucio was played, which was very little, but also even with Mercy is like most of the resources went into Jonak. when they stepped into the GOATs meta for New York, I think even still there was a lot of the main supports sort of focused more on the back line rather than the front line for New York. And you saw it when Arc moved into Justice a bit, is that he still played incredibly passive. He wasn't setting up any plays because he's so used to just my flex support. Where is he? Where's my flex support? There he is. Okay, time to sit next to him and make sure he survives throughout all eternity so he can do everything. But the reality is that you didn't have to peel for flex support in GOATs. Like, he sort of just was invincible a lot of the time.
That's one thing I've actually been pretty interested in with the NYXL team is like, because the problem is when they had their first run in season 1, it's always too easy when a team's very successful to just reverse engineer everything in your brain and believe that they planned all this and, you know, it was all like a genius game plan and, you know, that someone even told Jonak like, listen, you're going to do this in this way. It's going to be very unique and everyone's going to copy it. It's like, no, it just turns out like they probably just looked at the personnel they had. Some of them already played that way, and then they just did the bridge between some of the players because he saw when they went into GOATs, even at times when it wasn't very effective, they would still run that same style. Jonak still would have times where he was basically playing certain positions the same way that he would have been the MVP of the game in Dive, and everyone would go, what a god, how did he do that? And then in GOATs, you were like, why was he so far back on that play? Like that didn't make any sense. So it just shows how people's feel for the game, it definitely has to line up with the meta. It's not just like they're not all just adapting what they're doing. It'd be nice if they were. It's a good storyline.
I think player habits are hard to break. And regardless of coaching, like you have to have very good coaching to break player habits, especially when it's a player habit that was successful in the past. Because
of course, yes.
It's like sugar. It's like my body, my ape body just craves sugar all the time. And it wants to eat sugar. And it wants to get really fat because I want to eat sugar. And that's like there's like the biological directive is just eating carbs. But then the reality is like, well, it's actually really good.
Someone clip that. Out of context, that is a ridiculous clip.
But it's you know, and then it's like, and then if I really want to be a power lifter, and it works out really good because I'm eating a lot, obviously it's protein and sugar.
That's a good analogy.
Out for me, great. But the reality is now that we've shifted from power lifter meta for New York, where your flex support, his whole goal is to babysit Jonak and make sure Jonak does everything in the world, to a GOATs meta, which is a lot more like, okay, now I need to be a flexible, variable athlete in the front. And not the power lifter just keeping the flex support on my shoulders. So probably cut down on the carbs, but also I was successful eating carbs. So I'm just going to keep eating them. And I think that's sort of the New York effect.
I think you should do an analogy and bring in all the diets of the world. The Atkins diet, fucking keto. And I want an analogy for all of them referring to a team from the GOATs, mate. That's a video right there, mate. That's 20 whole
and it's really tough
on YouTube.
To break those. It's tough to break those habits as a player, I think. It's like if you're so used to success in a certain way and you've had a lot of success and your team was built around this style and you shift into a meta where your entire paradigm changes, which is what Lucio changed from Dive to Built in a significant way. And it's tough to break those habits without significant coaching. And even with coaching, it's hard.
Sure.
So I think that's sort of the New York main support issue in a way.
And then, you know, if you're a Zarya player, it's just a lot of little snacks, you know, small meals, 4 or 5 meals a day, you know, no big meal.
Yeah. We need a little more balanced diet there.
What do you think is the actual trajectory for the Washington Justice then? Like, how much further can they actually be one of the best teams from what you've seen so far?
Well, let's hear it from the coach. Let's see what the coach has to say.
Because I'll say, by the way, as an aside, if anyone ever says in any game, this player is hard carrying the fuck out of the team, that's usually actually a bad sign, because if that player ever has a dip in form, the team's just going to go down with him. So, what do you think?
I think it's very interesting. I think Hanzo's in a place where it's really hard to shut him down. It's not like a Genji where you could put a lot of extra resources in. And then, you know, Hanzo and Widow are just like, if they're on the day and they hit their shots, it's a very hard thing to deal with. But yeah, I do think like fundamentals are better than a player popping off on the day, you know? So
I also think that we're going to see more teams that are moving into strategies to shut down Widows. I think we saw that really actively in the London versus Charge game, when London's game plan was literally just send Fury and Birdring after Happy on the Diva and the Reaper. And they were a lot of their play setups were like the Reaper would teleport into Happy's position, and then the Diva would boost in, and they would just 2v1 him and destroy him and then move on. And the rest of the team couldn't do shit. So there's ways that you can play against the Widowmaker. And it may not be ideal in the meta in that you're not using the Hog in that case, you're using the Diva instead. But if you're I think if teams really want to deal with Corey, somebody needs to actually try because nobody's tried yet.
Yeah, I think teams just running back. And also Atlanta, you guys are a great example of a team that dealt with Widowmaker. Granted, you played Eternal, and my opinion of them is kind of meh, but like
Soon is also like ridiculously
when Soon pops
inconsistent.
Off, Eternal,
yes,
when Soon pops off, Eternal's actually decent. It's the first time I've ever said, yeah, this EU team in Overwatch is pretty good. Like it's the first time I've really said that at the Overwatch League level. And when Soon pops off, Eternal's pretty good. And you guys did a great job because you're like, let's make an easy choice and put Ursa on Genji, and then he just hunts Soon. And obviously,
I mean,
there's a little bit more in play. Obviously, if they peel for Soon a little bit better, then that becomes not as viable. And also, if you don't have Ursa level Genji, but it's definitely achievable.
I mean, you know what's great about this is we're actually going to see the Atlanta Reign play the Washington Justice
the next match.
So we're going to see what Casores is playing.
It's 2 weeks from now, though. The next week they don't play, but it's the next match they play. Yeah.
So I don't expect you to say very much about this because obviously you don't want to, don't want to spoil any secrets.
I can go in on the Paris Eternal match though. I definitely think that not taking Widow duels was part of our game plan. We just think shield pressure can do a lot. Like shield pressure, especially in the Orisa matchup. If they play the Widow Mei and you're playing the Hanzo Mei, and you have so much more shield pressure and they have to keep falling back because the arrows keep coming in and their Widow isn't getting the angles he needs, they have to give up all the space and you basically should have won before the fight has even begun, That's the bad part of the Widow thing. But if they can get super successful flanks, get a pick, and they're popping off on the day, I don't know. I think it's a non-consistent game plan, but it's still really hard to deal with. I mean, you even saw it in our game sometimes, where we were losing fights just because of bad play, but then Ursa came back and killed free, It's crazy sometimes in these sniper look-offs. It's just who's popping off. I think in general, though, as the meta goes on, you'll see player impact diminish because players will figure out what those flank angles are that Corey is gonna take in the match. I think that Reaper May comp that everyone's playing now, or a lot of teams are playing, we even played it on COF maps, is super interesting, and I think teams are so good at it because it's so similar to GOATs. You just fall up and run into the enemy team.
I just call it GOATs. I literally just call it GOATs. I've just said it's GOATs. It's literally GOATs again because it's the same objective. It's the same exact objective. Now it's flowchart even because now you just freeze D.Va, set up Blizzard, flowchart Overwatch. Here we go.
Yeah. There you go. It's floats.
Yep.
So it definitely, I think the meta is not figured out either just yet. I do think it's really good, but I think the GOAT style for that May Reaper is also super comfortable for teams because it's so similar to the style they're playing that, and we're still in a new meta that I don't think it's fully figured out. Now, would I be surprised if May Reaper is the full meta, most of it? No, I won't necessarily be surprised because it's really good, but I'm also not certain that it's 100% it. I think it's more of just a familiarity / new meta thing. So.
I think that comp could be very good on specific maps, specifically COF. But you saw, for example, Houston Outlaws run it against us on Blizzard World A1, and it got completely shit on because all we had to do was sit back and shoot their shield, while they're walking in. Yeah.
It's also what London did and lost to the Florida Mayhem. They basically just did that on every map, and then they got shit on.
All right, there's flaws. We understand.
Yeah,
it's not
Which is so weird because Spitfire just didn't do that before, and then they decided to do it against the Mayhem. Oh, Spitfire!
I just think they probably didn't prepare for that match. The thing about Spitfire is they're almost certainly locked for the overall top 6 in the season playoffs. Yes. So their level of danger is relatively low, all things considered. I just think they didn't care, but who knows? They just ran. The thing about Spitfire as well is if they start to run something, they are really, really bad at adapting in game. If they don't have a plan going in, then they're just terrible. And they won't change. So that's kind of what we saw. Also, Birdring was terrible in that series. He's so inconsistent as a player. A lot of people were saying, why are you saying he's inconsistent, Monty? He had an injury last season. I'm like, yes, he did. But he was also some matches he shows up and then some other matches he vanishes. I've been casting this guy's entire career. Like
I even feel like it's more infuriating than that, Monty. Like if someone was just standardly inconsistent, as in a sense that, you know, one day I'm good, one day I'm bad. It's like he'll have a bunch of bad games, and every time you think I'm out on this guy, that's like he'll just show some flash that like he actually can be really, really good, and you think that's why they keep him around. You're just waiting for that window, sadly.
Yeah. Sort of the curse of inconsistency, I have to say, which is why there's a running meme that I think London is bad. I'm like, I don't think London's bad. I just hate looking at them.
They're just a team that hurts to predict it.
Don't show your face to me, London Spitfire.
Because like there's like a separate tier list. It's sort of like the tier list you showed us, where it's like S, A, and Papega tier. But it's like it's more like I have like there's like the tiers, and there's like London tier, which is like this team could be good or bad. I don't know. I really have no.
I'll give you an analogy, right? In MMA, a really legendary fighter is a lightweight fighter called BJ Penn, right? And the thing about him was he was famously his nickname is even the Prodigy. He was just someone who, like, when he was 18, was already amazing at jiu-jitsu and already had very good boxing. And so the problem is, right? He's someone where in the early days of MMA, before they got like all the coaching stuff up to snuff, you know, and they got to the level where you have to be basically like a top athlete who was always conditioned. When he was fighting people who, you know, were like part-time people and people who were doing another job and just he could basically just dick around and he would still be amazing in all the fights. But when you got to the level where MMA had gotten to a really high level and you had all this sports science applied, basically when he would dick around like that, he just started to lose more and more fights and his status went down. But every now and then he would have like he'd obviously, when things slipped enough, he'd bring in the training camp and do like a serious camp, get shredded and being really, really top cardio coming. So as a result, though, it gave his fans literally false hope that, no joke, lasted like over half a decade when he became bad. Because what they'd always say is they'd go, yeah, but what if motivated BJ turns up? And it's like, yeah, but when do you see that? Like, how are we supposed to know when that is? So it's the same thing with the London Spitfire. They could literally lose 10 games in a row, and people will be like, but what if peak London Spitfire turns up?
It's true, though, right? Like,
they're like the boogeyman or something.
Before they lost to the Florida Mayhem, there was an argument that they were the best team so far at this stage. They were looking really good outside of their control. I think that's we have to go back and say having bad control maps is always just such a fundamental weakness, because you have to play it in the map 5 tiebreaker. So it's the map type you can least afford to be bad at, but also it's sort of the easiest map type for good teams to be good at, because it's much more about individual ability than about having like a set play on attack or defense that you often have on like hybrid escort and payload. So it was very weird to me that they were just trash. Part of it is Jester is just like really bad at Wrecking Ball, and they keep playing Wrecking Ball, which is a bit odd.
Shocking. In fact, it is shocking. In fact, that it keeps happening.
So I think that is part of the equation, but I do think it's funny that London, if you actually just, their individual talent is so high that they can just randomly peak, and you can't take them for granted, but they're sort of the Galaxy Brain Papega team where it's going to be one or the other and you never know which one it is. And they've got arguably the best player in the entire league in Prophet. Like, Prophet is such a fucking asset to that team when it comes to his flexibility and how fast he can learn new heroes and be in the top 3, if not the best at that hero in the league. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're just gonna Spitfire out of control. It's just the reality of it. And they also have done nothing with, you know, when you talk about the inconsistency of Bird Ring as well, is that they really haven't seemed like they've made any use of the players they picked up either to somehow fill that gap, like with Guard or anything like that, or to try to see like what they could do differently. And it's why I sort of admire you guys, Casores, with Atlanta, and it's also why a lot of teams I'm sort of like, oh, wow, this is actually like sick. I'm glad teams actually decided to make use of the players on the roster, because you come out Inlair is playing most of the time now for you, rather than Baby Bay, which would be, a lot of people expected more Baby Bay because of maybe more potential Widow or McCree or even Reaper. But you're actually having a lot of Inlair playing. Was that a targeted strategy for you guys from the beginning? Like starting from like stage 2 or 3, where you're like, Inlair, you're going to start training now to be like this? Or were you just like, damn, Inlair's pretty good right now, we're just going to put him in?
That's like, Inlair never was the brig player on our team, right? He just didn't perform well enough on the hero, couldn't learn it. So as soon as we figured that out, we were like, hey, Inlair, let's keep you grinding Widow. Let's keep you grinding like DPS characters before, like, in case we need them, you know, to like make use of our bench players. Because Inko, it's very much you have a chosen 6.
Sure.
It's very hard to stray away from it because you are playing the same comp over and over again, and having a team that, is all on the same line on every map is really, really useful. In this
so if Goats had lasted 3 more years, he'd have just been like a skeleton sat at a PC, like patiently waiting for my chance to get in the game, coach. Grinding.
Possibly, yeah. But so we made that decision early on. He likes grinding ranked as opposed to a lot of other players. So he had been playing ranked.
Is this the chosen one? Fucking hell.
Whatever we are scrimming, right? 6 to 8 hours a day on all of our scrim days. And he just kept grinding. And once 2-2 lock was announced, right, he started knowing oh, if I keep grinding, I get my spot. Sorry for the people picking again.
It's all right.
But he would get a spot, right? So he grinded even harder. Kept asking hey, coach, what can I work on now? He's like the ideal player on a team. Really motivated. So as soon as this 2-2 came around, we were like, how can we make him useful in our team, right? And a lot of the teams are putting their flex DPS player on Mei right now. We are on some maps too. But since Enler is so motivated, and we feel Mei is a new character to learn for Baby Bay. Ursa's pretty good at him, but also has a lot to learn. And for Enler, he said, I really want to play this meta. And I said, go grind Mei, keep grinding Mei. Show me what you learn in every scrim. And he has been improving at an alarming rate on the Mei.
Monty, are you aware of this piece of trivia? Because if you know the team we're talking about, this is going to be ridiculous. The player we're talking about, if you go to his Wikipedia page, got VAC banned from Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Now, why would that be, contextually for the Atlanta Reign, an unusual piece of trivia? They have Baby Bay as well. No, Naylor was VAC banned as well.
Yeah. Really?
They're just collecting all the cheaters. They're like, right, listen, if you were good enough to cheat in another game, don't cheat in this one, please. But you've been seen through walls your whole career. You know exactly where people's movements. Like, they've got 2 cheaters. That's actually pretty amazing.
Yeah, but you also have 2 ranked grinders as well, because somehow you have Inlair, the ranked grinder, and you also have Astro, the ranked grinder within your organization, which is a rarity, because increasingly now all Overwatch League players are like, man, okay, I don't want to play ranked. And somehow you have 2 ranked grinders.
They've got some very interesting recruitment metrics, is all I'm saying over at the Atlanta Reign. They're kind of going with some different angles no one else has seen. This is going to be their version of Moneyball.
I think overall in the org, and what especially Sephi is really good at, is scouting good talent. And I think you can see that a lot with the players we've been picking up, right? Like Astro is insanely good at Lucio. Sure. He's learning characters really fast because he's a rank grinder. And I think just in general, a lot of the players, especially the DPS players we picked up, are really good. Urster, Baby Bay, Enler, the Fran, all insanely talented.
Well, I mean, I tweeted the other day about Urster, and people were like, Monty, didn't you know that he was good before? I'm like, yes, I did know, but I don't think that anybody expected that he would have this level of performance this stage in the Overwatch League. It wasn't like everybody was saying when we were coming into 2-2-2, very few people were saying my top 5 most DPS that I'm super hyped to watch in the new meta. No one said Urster, but Urster is, I think, one of the most exciting players now in the meta. With the Genji play that he's been delivering has been incredible.
Yeah. I mean, also even outside the meta, even with the Ghosts, Urster's Brigida was legitimately the best part of Atlanta at times was Urster's Brigida. So it was kind of crazy to see someone that, because you really don't see too many players actually, if you really look at the context of the Overwatch League, how many players were great Brigidas and that are now extremely good so far in this lock. And we've seen some shifts because I don't really think that, let's take, for example, I don't think Blase's performance has been quite the same as it was on Brigida, though I do think he has been a lot. He's going to be opened up a lot more as the meta moves up, but I think his Brigida so far was a lot better. Then you have players that are maybe not that good at both. So it's kind of good to see a player that can actually own both and not have to worry about their skills really falling off. Because sometimes you don't have that. Sometimes you're really not having that at all. I also think Agilities is a candidate for someone whose Brigida got a lot better as the stage went on. It was a lot more impactful. And then now, once we've shifted into the role lock, I actually would prefer a lineup of KSF Shacks a lot of the times for Valiant, because I feel like they hit a lot of the same hero angles And Agilities hasn't really kept up the same performance that you'd expect from him and Genji and Pharah at times. So it's impressive to me, at least, to see someone grind Brigida, the Shield Maiden, for three stages and come out and still be incredibly good on DPS roles. Now, obviously, it's not always the case. It's also new meta. Like, Brigida players will get better. Like I said, I think Blase and Agilities will both get better as they go on, because now they're not having to play Brigida as much and they can focus back on their original roles. But I think that it's impressive for Erster in that regard.
I think that just attests to how much Overwatch is not as much of an aim-reliant game as people think, and more of like a brain game, where I think Erster's biggest strength is staying alive. Like, he will almost never die first in a fight. Like, it's once every 10 scrims I'll see him die first in a fight, you know? He's just insanely good at staying alive and then doing things on characters.
And dying first in a fight is really one of the biggest indicators, because if we look at general, if you start to look at general statistics within Overwatch, even the worst teams are able to convert pretty effectively a first elimination into a team fight win. So the best teams at doing this literally sometimes are in the 85 to 90+% rate. For example, last stage in stage 3, if the Hangzhou Spark were the best of this, and if they got the first kill in a fight, they would win 90+% of those fights. So it was very hard to beat them under those circumstances. So weirdly, because we have so many team fights in Overwatch, obviously team fight win rate is a huge part of that, but also we look at players statistically in terms of how often do they get the first kill if they're very good? And then how often does that first kill actually translate into a team fight win? Let me actually pull up some stuff for you guys real quick. I'm going to have to email myself some stuff with my phone. But I can actually, it's some of our stats documents, but I can actually pull up some stuff and discuss more specifically what some of this kind of stuff means.
Monty has to just do the retina scan and DNA blood test that goes off to a sampling center somewhere, and it unlocks his phone, allows him to see the stats. Yeah. Not if anyone else is peeking though, then we're all dead. It's just, like they come in, shadowy government agency shuts the whole thing down. Monty never actually casted the Overwatch League. It was quick shot the whole time.
Well, I'm excited to see such stats.
Yeah, let me see if I can find some.
What's the context to them? Set it up as you're looking for it. What type of stuff?
No, it's just interesting. So, for example, I'm looking right here. So, before the Justice's game yesterday, Captain Planet, our stats guy, came and sent us some documents from our stats database. And so, if we talk about, let's say, Hanzo, for example, so Corey gets the first elimination when he's playing Hanzo approximately 21% of the time, which is about the same as Erster. Actually, he and Erster have very similar Hanzo stats right now. They're basically identical. And their team fight win rate after that first elimination for both players is 100%. So about 21% of the time, both Erster and Corey are getting the first kill in a team fight, and their team fight win percentage after getting that first kill is perfect. So there's pretty good data on this kind of stuff. And if we look at Corey as well, on Widowmaker, again, he maintains 100% win rate after getting the first elimination on Widowmaker in a fight, and he's over 23% of the time. So almost 1 in 4 fights, he gets the first elim, and Justice win all of those fights. So these are the actually really important statistics that we tend to look at with players, especially on these sniper roles. Really, really critical. So that's pretty crazy that Corey has never lost a team fight as either Hanzo or Widow when he gets the first pick. Now, that was before the Titans game yesterday, but I'll take a look at this. I can't access the stats database from my house, unfortunately, but I will be taking a look at this when I start doing some research this next week.
And what are do you have it? Okay, well, I guess you don't have the in-depth, because I was about to say, what's the follow-up of, if he gets the first pick, does he get a pick? Do you have almost a...
The one I would want to see
after is his next elimination. I feel, because I feel like after Corey gets the first pick,
I don't
he gets the second pick soon after, and then once they're down 2 players, it's very tough to win the fight from there. Because
the one I would want to see is to contrast it by knowing if he didn't get the first kill. That would be the one to see what the jump up is.
Sure. I mean, basically at that point, we'd have to look at all of his teammates as well and see who else is getting the first picks in those fights. But also, this isn't a small sample size. So he has gotten the first pick on either Hanzo and Widowmaker in 19 team fights, and they've won all 19. That's a pretty decent sample size.
Definitely not bad, especially considering, but that's not including the Titans game, right?
Not including the Titans game.
Not including the Titans game, but I imagine it would still probably be roughly similar because of the Titans game.
Having watched that game, maybe it happened one time where he didn't get it, but that's still that's a nuts statistic. And Erster's right up there as well. So I think we're seeing the impact that some of these pick compositions have in the current meta and how valuable it can be to have a good Widowmaker or Hanzo player on your team and how easily that converts into team fight win rate. So Erster's in the same boat, at least on the Hanzo, but not on, obviously you don't play Erster on the Widowmaker. So,
well, I'm definitely excited to see then if that stat continues as well for the Atlanta, because Justice are capable of playing spoiler to a lot of teams actually. Since Atlanta, you guys are on the edge. Considering that
if you think about Avast, that also means logically someone's record is going to be broken.
Yeah,
someone cannot continue winning every single team fight.
That's true. That is true.
Unless, no, technically they could all still get the first kill and win all the fights, but it'd just be very unlikely when they play each other.
The classic just 0-0 match line.
If you want to do a WWE style rig the whole match, you could make that stat continue for both teams. It'd just be a very unusual game.
I'm waiting for the first 1-0 because I had one guy actually. I had to give him VIP in my channel. One guy did predict in the Fusion London game. He predicted the Mayhem 3-0. He was the one. Really? No one. I don't know how he did it, but some guy was like 3-0 Mayhem. It's happening today.
He was drunk. He was drunk.
Come on. So let me tell you a story Avast about drunk people predicting things. Maybe you can fill this in, Thorin, if you recall. Yeah. Wasn't it last World Championship for League of Legends?
No, it was a couple ago.
Oh, it was a couple ago. I think
it was 3 ago. What happened was three worlds ago, basically. Like we had the craziest upsets. Not just an upset where when number 12 beats number 8. We had ones where literally like number 16 beats number 1, and number 1 was like Korean team. So we had like results where basically like logically nobody could have predicted, because the point of how you do the pick'em in League is you have to basically pick like where every team will place, like you have to do the whole bracket, everything, and someone somehow did actually have this wild card team from Russia that nobody else even thought would get out of the group, making it to like the exact point they did in the tournament. And the reason why we know this is because in League there's that many people follow the game that the amount of pick'ems at the beginning, let's say it was like 17 million, at the end it was like some Doctor Strange shit. There was one guy at the end had this, and then what's great is because there was one guy, they tracked him down and they just said like, how did you know? And he just said, I filled that out when I was drunk sometime, I don't even remember. And he just had gotten it completely right. It's like that's the only way he could have gotten to that conclusion.
It's the infinite monkey theory.
It is basically,
Avast, you have a lot of monkeys on your stream.
I have an incredible amount of monkeys and an incredible amount of typewriters. And they are going full speed at all times. So it is
brute forcing it, exactly.
Invigorated. It's definitely invigorated some things and some content that has come out there, I have to say. So
see, Captain Planet's out there trying to like crunch all the numbers. He's like Mr. Fantastic or something. You're just like, fly, my pretties, fly.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that's the best way to do it, though, because like legitimately, the best content is where you just sort of like it's why Forsen's the king of Twitch memes, is because he just like lets his chat go wild. Sure. Like they just do whatever, and then like there you go. Like obviously within TOS constraints and everything, but like it's
those
for
are
me. Well, for me at least, like I brought it. So I turned down the $20 billion Mixer contract because I want to have those Twitch emotes, but it's still just I think it's just you gotta let them fly sometimes. You get some great stuff out of it. So.
I mean, how could you have a Pepega tier if there weren't Pepegas in your chat?
If there weren't Pepegas, exactly. Yeah, I love every day where I always have someone who's like. It's always the battle. It's like the battle of me versus Spitfire and Fusion has been my ongoing battle throughout the season, where I'm just like, it's like you're underrating Fusion, you're underrating Spitfire, like every day, and I'm like, they're just not doing anything. Like I can't justify them. It was the first time I could ever justify putting Spitfire this high, but I always have people at the Woodricks. It's like the big fan bases, no matter what, they're gonna come at me. It's like no.
Is, like, because people colloquially will say, it's my Twitch. The problem is if you say, Avast's hosting another mixer where people are going to go and say a bunch of private stuff about the industry that shouldn't be said publicly on stream. It's too on the nose if it's called your mixer, literally, It's too on the nose, that one. You got to keep at least some level of abstraction to trick these motherfuckers to thinking there's no audience there. Right, well, I've got a question then. Here's an obvious setup is two teams, as we just alluded to, who had the shocking swept when they were supposed to be the favourite was London and Vancouver, and they play in the very next match in the Overwatch League. So what do we think coming into this matchup?
I'll let someone else
wade into the minefield first. Clear it out a bit for him if you could.
So first, let's leave Casores' thoughts there.
I think it all depends on what Spitfire shows up. It's like
the London cop-out, huh?
Yeah, they had a very awkward situation of Prophet, the one consistent guy on their team who always does well on May. So Birdwing basically has to pop off.
I love that, by the way. I love that. So we've just come out of so sick of seeing fucking Prophet stuck on Zarya. It's time for some DP. What? Oh, he's on May. Right, yeah, forget that. Forget about maybe next stage.
His Hanzo's really good, too.
No, so. I much prefer when he's on the Hanzo for Spitfire, honestly. I much prefer it over to their May. But when they're running Prophet's Hanzo, because Hanzo, in my opinion, is honestly... Obviously, we're ignoring the synergy of Reaper May and how good it is because of their actual synergy. But I personally think Hanzo is currently the best DPS hero in the game, just balance-wise, in terms of how much he does and how well he can actually just out-snipe Widow even. It's legitimately insane the amount of power his kit has. So I feel like keeping Prophet on Hanzo is a far better play for London because then they don't have to have synergy. Prophet can just play the Gatling gun Arrow Man and they can just roll people repeatedly. And he's so mobile as well that he can consistently get flanks. So that's personally, I feel like they should just stick with the Hanzo. But obviously, who knows what's going on?
What else were you going to say? Casores. What else were you going to say?
God, continuation of butchering my name. That's all right.
Come on, Casores.
Was the implication if he's on May, then it's not going to be a good match for them?
No, I think could be good, but if they're going to double sniper a lot, which if they play Prophet on Hanzo, they might have to. I think Vancouver and their style of running one sniper and then the Genji with Haxo could be very good depending on their map pool. I don't know exactly what maps they play, but
I'll check it. Apparently it's Busan, Temple of Anubis, Hollywood, and Route 66. That's
a pretty decent double sniper picks, honestly, for several of those maps. So we could see that. I would like to see. I mean, I don't even think they have to play double sniper, but the Prophet Hanzo is crazy, and just Hanzo is such an insane carry potential. I mean, Corey, even though he's a hit scan player, I saw someone was nitpicking me. When I was calling Corey the best, I had this Corey's going to be the best NA hit scan player coming into the league or whatever, and they're like, well, he played Hanzo yesterday, so it's not really hit scan to Avast. And it's well, Hanzo kind of is hit scan right now because of Storm Arrow, in a lot of ways. So
it's not quite, but.
It essentially is. It's pretty close, and often. So I think putting Prophet on there is it's a good bit. It's a good bit for them. So what's the final verdict, Casserole? What's the final verdict? Is it London win or is it Titans
win? I think Titans is probably going to win that. I think it's going to be 3-1.
Yeah, I'm so reluctant to really give London wins against good teams until they prove that they can play control. Because against good teams, when you force yourself in a situation to win all non-control maps, you might drop one of those and send yourself to a map 5. And then if you suck at control, then you're just going to keep sucking. So I don't know. I think London is very close to being one of, if not the best teams in the league. But until they solve those control issues, I just don't see that they will be there.
I agree with that. Much. I think Titans are still the clear favorite in the matchup for myself as well. I personally think that Spitfire's performances so far, including their control, does not really put them in the same category as Titans right now. Because sure, Titans got rolled by Justice, but every team has bad games, and I can't put Spitfire into the every team has bad games category because they have them so often. It's rather I can put Titans in that category because they so rarely do have bad games.
Their second loss ever.
And also, Justice is looking insane. Justice is looking legitimately insane. And obviously, some people disagree, but I do have Justice very high in my rankings right now, above Titans after that win, based off their previous performances. So I think it would be kind of crazy to say this is Spitfire going to show up again. And it's I don't think there's any. I think you can't say really conclusively that Spitfire come up. You can roll the dice and maybe Spitfire shows up, but Titans seem
also there was no real reason to be taking the Justice seriously at the time the Titans were playing them, because you have to keep things in context. So first off, I thought the Justice were actually looking very good, but it was hard because their previous 2 games were against the Toronto Defiant and the Florida Mayhem.
Yes.
So the time everyone didn't know.
Both look a lot better this stage, though.
Exactly, yes.
Yes, they have.
But and that's emerged later, though.
I said that like at the start of the stage, too. I'm like, I was watching that Florida game. I was like, this is actually a pretty good game of Overwatch. You know, it's not as horrible. Like, people expected it to be really bad. It wasn't bad. So, you know, coming into that, it was a bit of a surprise. But if you're just sort of sitting there, like pretend you're the Vancouver Titans, you basically have the number 1 seed locked up. In order for you to not be the number 1 seed, it would require the Shock to win what? Basically all their remaining games, and the Titans to lose all of their remaining games. And that's the only way that you actually get knocked out of the first seed position in the Pacific Division. And okay, you might get knocked out by the NYXL, but they took a loss here too. So you're still up 2 games on them. And it seems likely that, you know, even though Vancouver does legit have a very hard schedule for the rest of the stage, they have a head-to-head match against both NYXL and the Shock. But if they win those games, then you increase the differential, right? So It's not actually terrible for them overall. So if they can win one or both of those games against Shock or NYXL, they should be in a pretty good state. So if I'm a coach and I'm saying, okay, what are we doing this week, Vancouver Titans? You know, it's kind of pathetic that they didn't prepare more when they had 1 game. But look at the evidence. You just 4-0'd the Florida Mayhem, right? And you see the Washington Justice play a much more close game earlier this week against the Florida Mayhem. Are you really worried about the Justice? Probably not. And I think that was a really poor, like, they underestimated the Justice for sure. But I don't think we would be having anywhere near this same conversation as the Justice. Think if they get 4-0'd by the Titans, what are we saying about them right now? Oh, Justice beats Toronto and Mayhem. Like,
yeah,
who cares really? Like, they're not a great team. So
I would even say this, Monty, like one of the things that I think people undervalue is it's like, I'll give you a great example. So obviously 3 of us have been on desks as like talent analysts, commentator, whatever. If you do that role, like, listen, your base knowledge of the things that you learn and you literally live the game is already going to be pretty good for most teams anyway. And then the idea is you top up for a specific team you don't know well, or you go into something specific you want to bring a point out of. Like, but the point is you can do unlimited legwork trying to find an interesting stat, an interesting angle. So the thing is, there has to be an impetus behind why you're going to do it. It's like no one's not preparing for any of these teams. They're just using their time management differently. So like in this scenario, if you're playing a team you've never beaten or is above you in the league, you might put in above and beyond the hours that the other coaching staff would to get to kind of make up the gap or to find some unique edge. Whereas as you might say, hey, if you think it's the standard game plan, you do your work still, but you might not have something specialized for them. Like, for example, in light of what's happened the first few weeks, now teams will be going hog deep on trying to find out, is there a way to disrupt Corey? Is there a way to change the dynamic in that sense? Whereas before, to some degree, they're waiting for that to be proven. Yeah, you'd think it's going to drop off after a week or something. Like, yeah, why not?
You wouldn't tailor a strat necessarily to shut down Corey in a previous meta, but you must do it now. I mean, we talked about his crazy statistics, and like, if this guy's going to keep popping off at this level, somebody needs to do something about him. So that's going to be the real test, I think, is next week. And I think that's what's exciting about the Atlanta Reign game, is that these are 2 teams that are both performing really well in a role lock scenario. And weirdly, you could argue that maybe Justice versus Reign is the most hype game we have next week, which is strange to say, but I'm looking at the rest of the matchups. Maybe it's Shock versus Dragons, but Dragons haven't been doing great. I mean, I am most intrigued out of all the matches we have next week. Maybe Guangzhou versus NYXL is good too.
I think that'd be a good match.
We've got some good matches, but I'm just saying, like, to even have this in the conversation of potentially best match of this week. And I certainly think that it's going to give us the most information about both of these teams, because I don't think either of them either of you guys have been really well tested by an opponent that is preparing specifically for you, because I think people were underestimating both the Reign and the Justice. And I don't think they're going to underestimate each other in this circumstance.
Since we referenced... Oh, sorry, go ahead, Matt.
No, I think one thing that Reign has in this meta that a lot of other teams don't is that we have an incredibly good academy team that we can book in-houses against. Our academy team, just for reference, beats over half the Overwatch League teams right now in scrims.
There we go. He said it.
Now, Scrimbucks always
Exactly.
are volatile currency. But
Scrimbuck economy is up at the moment. You have to understand
your
that.
academy team is great, and the investment you guys have in academy is incredible. So
not least because they're having a knock-on effect of demoralizing half the Overwatch League teams, apparently.
Whenever we see teams run a certain strat or do something, we have our academy team run that strat and play against it for like a full block, For example, if you play against Shanghai Dragons, a lot of teams don't play Pharaoh Widow last stage. But we could make our academy team run Pharaoh Widow. It's not going to be at the level that the Shanghai Dragons play it, but it's still going to be practice against that certain comp. And I think that's really, really valuable, especially in a meta where not everything is set and almost every team runs something different. Added to that, them doing our warm-ups, for example, is also incredibly effective because we just scout the enemy team, make our academy team run what we think the opponent is going to play, and we get like the perfect warm-up against the team compositions that we want against an incredibly skilled team too, because I'd say our academy team wins over 50% of our scrims against us too, just because they have such.
Sounds like you should just have the academy team in.
Yeah,
they're very young. They're very young, though. Is the problem? So
they have free underage players. Yeah.
Yes, and they're actually insanely good. They think you guys are the model. What has always been a touchy topic, I think, or at least a topic where people are like, well, what's the point of tier 2 of owning academy teams? I should say for a lot of these squads. I mean, and you guys are sort of a lot of people do. A lot of people do.
Who are a lot of people? Like idiot fans?
Well, I mean, for one, we could list several orgs, a lot of orgs that don't have any academy teams.
That's true.
So I think there's a ton of Overwatch teams that don't see value in it right now.
Yes, I think the value is like, yes, the problem. So the double-edged sword is that you are paying to develop players that could be contracted by other teams. But the advantage is you can always have that opportunity to match that player's salary.
Yes.
And you can use them, like Casores is saying, to actually make your A team functionally better by having a scrim partner that you can control entirely. Yeah. So it can make your regular squad better. It can also help you hide strats, which is very effective. So
I'll even throw in as well, if they're winning that many scrims, obviously as a result, it's no surprise all these teams are willing to scrim the academy team in that sense. And as a result, I bet the evaluations on should we take this player into the main team, should we sell this player, it's going to be way better than if they're just playing other contenders teams.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and you have the inside information, right, about working with that player over an extended period of time, about their work ethic, attitude. So you just get more information to operate off of, because sometimes you may not want that player on your main roster, and you just get a fat check for selling him to another team.
Yep.
If you are good at running a Contenders roster, you should not be losing money, in my opinion.
You really should not. And I think it's just the sort of the down where we get back into the whole is Overwatch League staff good scenario. I think there are like also some secondary like economic factors at play. It's like, sure, some orgs probably don't have as much wiggle room. But also it's like, if Boston can run an academy team, you can run an academy team. Every other org in existence, you can.
I do think, though, that having an academy team, that is not good enough to challenge your Overwatch League team. Could be really bad, because then you're just running strats against them and they're falling over, you need.
Well, that's sort of the tier 2 like equation, though, right? Is like sometimes you're going to get good, sometimes you're going to get bad. But if you have staff that's competent and you're investing properly in it, then you're going to get not necessarily the Atlanta Academy, because I think that sort of squad is sort of a confluence of a lot of factors right now, and also Brad's scouting ability in terms of finding those players. But also, it's like the benefit of tier 2 is that you're not working with Overwatch League contracts. You can sort of just like cycle, like you can build a new roster pretty fast if you want. I
actually have some exclusive information. I know the method that Sephi uses to get these mad young talents, right? He just goes into Counter-Strike matchmaking, and when he sees like a young player who's obviously cheating, he goes, listen, son, this game ain't for you. You're going to be banned soon enough. If you want a future, have you ever heard of this game called Overwatch? You're good with the AWP. The Widowmaker. Let me introduce you to a whole new world. And then he takes them out. So, he's getting ahead of the game, literally.
Yeah. I mean, what I don't understand about that entire ban thing is Baby Bay has some of the best mechanics of the entire league. And I just don't even understand why players who are so naturally gifted were even gravitating towards these.
I know. That is a bit of a weird one, isn't it? Especially as also he's a very cool person in terms of personality. So it's not like he's the like toxic kid you'd expect would be doing that. You know,
well, maybe in ranked. Well, maybe in ranked. I think the baby ranked persona is far different than his real life persona.
Okay.
You do also have to think that these mistakes that they made, right? They were years and years and years.
Sure.
Like
nobody's holding it over them now.
They've obviously matured, and the person you see now obviously isn't them like 5 years ago when they did get banned.
And also, the years ago is still just like, if you really think about the relative time frame of age, it's like, granted, it's not like I'm like looking back with some sort of great wizened wisdom due to my own age, but it's more of just like they're all like in their 20s and they made the mistakes when they're in their teens. So like, if you really think about the scale of time there and like what maturity level they're at, it's like, it's now obviously I think there's a different conversation to be had of like when you cheat and what should be there. But like if it's,
I mean, I'll put the counterpoint. Alexander the Great did conquer the known world by the time he's about 18 or something. So just
well, I guess if everyone just has the foresight of Alexander the Great.
People lived until they were 40 at that time.
No.
So he was already in middle age.
Okay.
He also sort of was like a nobleman, I think, right, and inherited a kingdom essentially. Yes. So I think
he
very
was
different.
The king of Macedon.
Yeah. So slightly different circumstances to whoever might be playing in CS:GO in their living room. But
I thought the last team we could talk about, because like, we've got just enough time to do this, I think, is obviously the Florida Mayhem. They are right now in the overall rankings the worst team in Overwatch League. They were 3-21 in total, and they've had a few wins. Obviously, this big one that they just had right last week. Well, obviously, a key thing to add when you think about the Florida Mayhem is 6 of their players did join the roster within the last 3 months. Like, this is not the same squad that started the Overwatch League. And yes, obviously, Bare Hands himself has come in, and literally his title involves scouting, etc. So they've been putting in a lot of work in this regard, and they are 100% Korean now. They finally got the last main, holdout. He sold the last apartment so that the big construction firm could come in and make a mega mall with Koreans instead of his homely little thing where he was a craftsman working on rocket launchers or whatever, like
Bare Hands is the Walmart of Overwatch.
Yeah, he's that evil guy who just persuades you to leave. Shops. Exactly.
He forced Ben Spook to close down his Tavik like tool workshop. He's like, okay, I guess he can't have Tavik anymore. And it's like, damn.
Well, what's good is obviously
sell the land.
Obviously, initially Tavik wouldn't give up. He was like, listen, I've been here a long time. This is my home. So what he did is the same strategy you use. You just make it more and more uncomfortable for you to stay there until eventually at the end you just go, I'm out. And you go, well, that's all we wanted all along. So here you go, sir. Golden handshake. See you on the way out. So what do you think about this team then, the Florida Mayhem? Are they going to complete this? Like, they have a pretty easy schedule for this stage. So does it continue from here? I mean, obviously there's no chance to make the real playoffs, but there's still something to play for when you got a new roster. You're trying to see how good you can be.
I'll let the coach go again first because I have some bias, except not actually, but it's some perceived bias. So.
Okay.
I think after rotating 3 rosters, they might have finally gotten a decent roster now. You know what I hate is that they picked up so many players at once and a coaching staff. It just feels like lazy scouting on my part, like not picking out the best from a few teams, but just picking up a package mid-season and the coaching staff.
Well, wasn't that just New York XL, which Bare Hands also made? Then you just do the exact same method again now for Florida?
Yeah, his plan is just brute force players into the team until some of them are good. It's a nice strategy if you've got money.
Yeah.
So I think Florida's going to be better.
What are they good at now then?
Well, I think I interrupted him, so go right ahead.
Yeah, their tank line is a lot better. I think.
Yes.
Gargoyle.
That was their
really
main problem before.
Gargoyle is really good. Definitely an upgrade over Swan and Zephyr.
They're still running
Gargoyle Korean
a little bit. I think what was funny about the London game was that they subbed in all of their B team, Swan,
and still won the last match.
They still won Junkertown.
They're not really running them. They just were like, oh, you can have this map. We've already won.
Yeah, but we know at that point London was mega booed because they're so emotional. That series is over. I think their tank line is definitely huge. A Gargoyle is definitely a talent that was an insane pickup, for sure. I think because it was sort of a sort of just, what is it? I guess I forget the word, but pretty much a Pyrrhic. It was a Pyrrhic victory for Mayhem in that they picked up the WGS squad that was really good at 3-3, or at least a lot of it, and then 3-3 went away. And then now they're roll-locked because they took so long to get them in the country that they picked them up for a meta they were no longer relevant in. But it worked out.
I think, though, that it was smart to grab Fate when he became available, because the idea was, I think, to have Korian and Gargoyle and have them have that built-in synergy from WGS Armament. But then when Fate became free, and the Valiant were looking to offload him, I like the fact that they moved immediately in order to pick him up, because I think that I think passing on a player like Fate is silly if you're the Florida.
It's a good gamble for someone to buy low.
Yeah, sure.
Especially since you can trade pieces, because they didn't want a Western roster anyway. So trade your Western pieces for Fate.
Yeah, and also they have Korian as a backup anyway. So why not just like take over Fate's contract and deal away some of your players? I think that was a smart move for them. And I think if we look at the players that they maintained, like Saya player, obviously doing very well again on many of the hit scans. The tank line was their biggest problem. It seems like they've shored that up significantly. Hagapun has been performing well all season. He was their best player for most of the season. So
yeah, I thought Byron was an odd pickup to begin with.
I thought that was the weirdest pickup they had.
He was, and also I have to say that I wasn't impressed for all the hype that Chris received. He never really showed it in 3-3, but I think also because Chris is probably a lot better in this meta now than he was in the 3-3 meta again, because he's the player habits of his entire player history was in non-3-3, and he was picked up essentially from performances from non-3-3, while Rain on the other hand was 3-3 focus, which is obviously, but now he's not even playing again because it's no longer 3-3. But Gargoyle's really good. I think so. Actually, the most shocking part to Florida for me is BQB's resurgence in a lot of ways. And I think BQB has been sort of a lot stronger now. His Hanzo in particular was, I think, very good in the matches that they played, including the Spitfire match. He seemed to have like far more impact than I've ever seen him have. You know, he was one of those players that like guard where, you know, you would talk to Wolf and Achilles.
You'd hype him up as a Sombra.
He'd be like, this guy, his EMPs are so big, they're solar flares. Like every electronic in the world is knocked out because how good he is at Sombra. And like, I would just like, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing BQB's impact at any point on the Sombra here, but I am seeing it on his Hanzo and his Mei. I think BQB actually is, because that was the other question mark for me for Florida is like what DPS lineup they have besides Saya moving into 2-2. And BQB has actually slotted exceptionally well, I think, from what I've seen. He looks a lot more comfortable now on projectiles than he does on Sombra. So I think they're going to.
I think it also is partially just it took when you change so many things, and I know that the Mayhem, they've been trying to trial different players. They're not looking at results for this season. It took them a while to sort of settle in this stage in the roll lock into the Fate, Gargoyle, BQB, Saya player, Chris Hagapun roster that they've been running. And I think that it probably took a while to integrate their coaches as well, even though some of them, you know, the coaches came from WGS Armament as well. Many players hadn't worked with them before. So this thing was always going to take time. And in some ways, I'm kind of impressed that they are as good at the roll lock meta as they have been already.
Yeah. I think it's exceptional. I think it's pretty phenomenal that, and I think that's just also the reality of like when you have a team that you shift the entire concept and core of like, you start out like, we really want to be mixed, or we really be like, we want to be a mixed team. Yeah. And then you have like a what is clearly a different ideas within an organization of where they want to go because of these performances. And you have to deal with visas, and you have to deal with actually selecting your roster and then building a whole new roster again. Because let's take, for example, Shock for last season. And Shock was really, really bad for a long time until they got their new players in, and then they improved. But also it was clear that then they added Krusty that their organization wanted to go a different way, so they're still building. It's like they had a great stage. They had a better stage 3 than they had stage 4, actually, even though they were on a resurgence. And so I think a lot of times people are like, oh, well, if a team rebuilds, they should be immediately good. But the answer is not really. No. They're not always going to be immediately good. I think the whole Valiant, like, oh, we bring in Moon and now our team is fixed thing does not happen very frequently. It's some other factors, especially if your organization's building. So Mayhem, I think, is an anomaly.
Go.
Maybe make a final statement, because he needs to go now anyway, so this would be a good chance to end. What's the final statement, man?
I think the weird thing about the Mayhem is that they had Awesome Guy, I think he later renamed SNT, solo watching their scrims for like a 3-month period. So they had no other coaching staff. And he was a player before. So I don't even know how much coaching he did watching their scrims. So they were very low on the coaching staff, and I think that's like the biggest change they brought in, like getting these new coaches, and those like take time to affect and set into like how the environment's gonna be. And I hope like that does well for the Mayhem, and I hope they're good. I don't know.
Yeah, you don't want to waste of a slot in essentially which is what Mayhem has unfortunately been now for 2 seasons up until just now, where they've sort of just done nothing. As Sideshow would say, they've been entertainment thieves in a lot of ways. Well, I guess he said that for Justice, but
yes,
it was
it
still
applies.
I think it applies. I honestly think it applies far more to the Mayhem than it ever did to Justice, in my opinion. But I'm happy to see that. I really don't like it when any teams are just so bad that you have to just write them off. So having Mayhem be a lot better now is always good.